The North Atlantic at 2:30 in November is not a place that invites philosophical reflection. It is a place that invites checking your harness and trusting your instruments. Because the water is approximately 4 degrees Celsius, the swells run 3 to 5 meters with a regularity that feels geological, and the low overcast ceiling, sitting at about 800 feet on this particular night, means that the horizon where sea ends and sky begins is a theoretical concept rather than a visible feature. The wind from the northwest was running at 26 knots across the flight deck of USS Gerald R. Ford, and the flight deck crew working the night recovery cycle were doing their jobs in the specific way that people do jobs in North Atlantic November, efficiently, without sentiment, and with the private conviction that whoever decided to place aircraft carriers in the North Atlantic in November had made a decision that deserved more scrutiny than it typically receives. USS Gerald R. Ford had been conducting carrier air wing operations in the Norwegian Sea for 11 days, part of a NATO exercise with a straightforward purpose: demonstrate that the U.S. Navy could project carrier aviation into the high north, sustain operations in conditions that make sensible people uncomfortable, and do so with professional competence that sends a clear message to anyone observing from the east. The exercise had gone well. The air wing had completed its scheduled sorties. The weather had been cooperative in the North Atlantic sense of the word, survivable rather than pleasant. The crew had settled into the focused, slightly fatigued efficiency that week 2 of any high-tempo exercise produces. At 2:30, the Combat Information Center watch was the mid-watch, the rotation that runs from midnight to 4 o'clock and which, in the experience of every sailor who has stood it, has a specific quality of temporal distortion. The hours between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock do not pass at the same rate as other hours. They pass like geological epochs measured in coffee cups. The tactical action officer had been at his console since midnight and had consumed 2.5 cups of what the carrier's CIC described, with the aggressive optimism of institutional catering, as coffee. He had formed no opinion about whether this description was accurate. He was tracking the night's recovery operations, the surface picture, and the standard suite of contacts that the Norwegian Sea generates at this time of year. Merchant traffic on the northern European lanes, a Norwegian Coast Guard vessel 40 miles to the northeast, a Russian intelligence gathering ship near around night, AGI, sitting on the carrier group's southern bearing at 18 miles, doing what Russian AGIs do in the presence of U.S. carrier operations, which is observe, record, and be there. The AGI had been there for 4 days. Its presence had been logged, its communications had been monitored, and it had been treated with the professional attention that a known collection platform merits, and the professional indifference that its inability to do anything beyond observe merits simultaneously. It was, in the operational vocabulary of the watch, a feature of the environment rather than a dynamic element of the threat picture. The tactical action officer had noted it during his watch handover brief, with the same tone used to note the weather. Present, expected, not requiring action. He had picked up his coffee. He had accepted the watch. He had settled in for what he anticipated would be a procedurally busy, but tactically quiet recovery cycle. The E-2D Hawkeye in the southern orbit updated its track at 2:41. The contact had appeared at the edge of the E-2D's radar coverage. Bearing 165, range 290 nautical miles, altitude 12,000 feet, speed 320 knots. 320 knots. The E-2D's radar operator had the contact for 4 seconds before the classification returned from the mission computer. And those 4 seconds were the specific 4 seconds during which a professional asks, what flies at 12,000 feet over the Norwegian Sea at 320 knots at 2:41 on a November night? The answer the mission computer provided confirmed what the operator had already suspected. The emission profile, specifically the surface search radar broadcasting on a frequency that NATO electronic warfare databases associate unambiguously with Russian maritime patrol aviation, identified the contact as a Tupolev Tu-142 Bear H. The E-2D controller keyed the data link. The contact appeared in USS Gerald R. Ford's tactical picture at 2:41:38. The Tu-142, Bear H is a remarkable aircraft, and this channel will give it the honest accounting it deserves before explaining why that accounting is simultaneously a compliment and a comedy. The Bear entered Soviet service in 1956. The year jet aviation was the exciting new frontier, and turboprop technology was the sensible alternative to it. The Tu-142 is the maritime patrol variant, refined over decades into a long-range surveillance platform that Russia still operates, because it is genuinely effective at flying very far over very cold water for very long periods and arriving where it is going. Its 4 Kuznetsov NK 12MV turboprops produce approximately 60,000 shaft horsepower, enough to move 400,000 pounds of aircraft across 6,000 nautical miles of ocean, and enough to produce, as a byproduct, an acoustic signature audible to every listening device in a significant portion of the North Atlantic. The Bear is not stealthy. The Bear has never been stealthy. The Bear appears to have made a considered institutional peace with this fact, sometime around the Eisenhower administration, and not revisited it since. NATO crews who have intercepted it describe its sound as something heard once and never mistaken for anything else. At 2:41, the Tu-142 was 290 miles from USS Gerald R. Forward and closing at 320 knots. Time to the carrier's 100-mile defensive perimeter, approximately 45 minutes. The tactical action officer noted the contact, noted the classification, and noted the CAP status board. This is where the story acquires its specific shape. USS Gerald R. Royal Ford's nightcap at 0241 consisted of 2 F/A-18Fs on a standard southern orbit, the bearing from which Russian maritime patrol aircraft reliably approach on Atlantic Circuit runs. Both aircraft had been airborne for 2 hours and 40 minutes. The lead aircraft had approximately 22 minutes of fuel before bingo, the point at which the pilot must turn for the carrier regardless of what else is happening, because the alternative is a water landing in 4-degree water at night. 22 minutes. The Tu-142 was 45 minutes from the defensive perimeter. The math produced a gap. The CAP aircraft would reach bingo approximately 23 minutes before the alert aircraft could be airborne, climb, and position. During those 23 minutes, the Tu-142 would cross the 100-mile zone with no dedicated CAP aircraft on its bearing. The tactical action officer noted this gap at 2:42. He noted it with the calm of a professional who has done the arithmetic correctly and does not benefit from pretending otherwise. He notified the commanding officer at 2:43. He requested the alert aircraft to be moved to immediate catapult status at 0243. He noted that the Tu-142's approach trajectory placed it on a course consistent with a planned photography and collection pass of the carrier group. Standard Russian maritime patrol activity, documented in previous deployments, legal in international airspace, and specifically designed to transit the carrier's operating area at a range that makes a point while remaining outside any engagement threshold. He noted that the AGI to the south had altered its course slightly at 2:41, in a timing correlation that was probably not coincidental. He logged all of this in the watch log, using the compressed, precise language of someone who is making a record for the debrief and is fully occupied making the record accurate. Somewhere on the flight deck, below and aft of the CIC, the alert aircraft crew was making their way to their aircraft with the specific movement energy of people who have been told that 5-minute alert has become 2-minute alert at 2:43 in the morning. The plane captain, running the pre-launch checklist, had been doing pre-launch checklists long enough to perform them without consulting the card, which was useful, because the card was difficult to read in a 30-knot headwind on a pitching flight deck in November darkness. He ran the checklist. The aircraft was ready. He reported to the flight deck officer. The flight deck officer reported to the Carrier Air Traffic Control Center. The Carrier Air Traffic Control Center reported to the Tactical Action Officer. The Tactical Action Officer noted the time, 2:47. Alert aircraft at launch-ready status. Gap window, 23 minutes if the CAPI aircraft diverted to tanker, or the SAPI aircraft holds on station until bingo and the alert aircraft launches immediately on bingo call. He chose the second option. The CAP lead aircraft would hold until bingo, providing coverage to the last possible moment before diverting to the tanker track. The alert aircraft would launch on the bingo call and be at intercept altitude within 14 minutes. There would be a 9-minute window in which the Tu-142 crossed the 100-mile perimeter with no dedicated cap aircraft. The E-2D would maintain continuous track. The carrier's spy radar would paint the contact without pause. The alert aircraft would be closing from behind. 9 minutes was 9 minutes. 9 minutes in which a 68-year-old Russian turboprop, loudly and slowly and entirely legally, transited the outer edge of the carrier's operating area with no fighter on its wing. The Tu-142 crew knew about CAP fuel states. This is not a guess. Russian maritime aviation has been flying Atlantic circuit runs against U.S. carrier groups since the 1960s. They understand the rotation cycles, the tanker track geometry, the approximate fuel parameters for nightcap at this range from the carrier. The timing of this approach, arriving at the 100-mile perimeter window at the specific point in the cap rotation when fuel state would be a factor, was not accidental. It was planned. The planning was competent. The execution at 241 to 347 was professional. This channel acknowledges the professionalism and then explains why the professionalism produced an outcome that was, from every other angle, a very expensive way to visit a carrier group that already knew everything about your aircraft. The KP lead aircraft called bingo at 0308. The tactical action officer had been watching the fuel gauge for 20 minutes, counting down with the specific awareness of a watchstander who knows what happens next and has prepared for it. Cap lead bingo, diverting tanker track. The alert aircraft launched from the number 1 catapult at 0309. The launch happening before the cap lead had completed its first turn toward the tanker. The two aircraft passing through the same airspace altitude band, briefly as one turned south and the other climbed north. The E-2D controller had both aircraft on scope. The Tu-142 was at 114 miles, bearing 168, speed 320 knots. Closure rate 2 miles per minute. Time to reach the 100-mile line 7 minutes. The Tu-142 crossed the 100-mile perimeter at 3:16. The alert aircraft was at 61 miles, climbing through 22,000 feet, turning to intercept bearing. Time to wings level. Intercept, approximately 11 minutes. For 11 minutes, the most capable carrier-based fighter in the American inventory was chasing a contact that was already inside the theoretical defensive zone. And the contact was, this cannot be stated too plainly, a turboprop bomber from 1956 that was cruising at 320 knots and could not have outrun a modern commercial airliner. The physics of the situation were not in any doubt. The outcome was not in any doubt. But the geometry was the geometry. And 11 minutes of geometry is 11 minutes of geometry regardless of what occupies it. The Tu-142's crew, for their part, was working. They were not sightseeing. The aircraft's Berkut 95 surface search radar, a system that would not be mistaken for cutting edge by any definition available to the current century, was painting the surface picture below, cataloging the carrier group's formation geometry, recording the merchant traffic, noting the AGI's position. The mission was reconnaissance and collection, and the crew was conducting it with the systematic attention of professionals who have flown this route many times and know what they are looking for and how to document it. They were also, it should be noted, broadcasting their surface search radar on a frequency that the SLQ-32 suites, distributed across the carrier group, had been logging since the E-2D first acquired the contact at 241. Everything the Berkut 95 transmitted, every pulse, every sweep, every mode transition was deburrowed. Ansherwagen Dawes. Best video churur. Inakikin Asamon Railwig. Sandicites and Shuris. Beshrive on Nori. Time-stamped and entered into the electronic order of battle file with the unhurried completeness of a system that has no other agenda. The alert aircraft closed to visual identification range at 0324. An A-18F coming alongside the Tu-142 at 330 knots, barely faster than the Russian aircraft's cruise speed. This is the specific indignity of intercepting something that is nearly as fast as the aircraft sent to shadow it. The F/A-18F pilot managed closure to avoid overrunning the contact. a routine maneuver in training that nonetheless produces the distinct cockpit awareness that your airspeed differential is measured in single digits rather than hundreds of knots. The Tu-142 was, in the pilot's post-intercept debrief words, big, loud, and exactly where the E-2D said it would be. He positioned on the port wing at 300 meters and keyed his radio. The Russian crew acknowledged the intercept on guard frequency with the professional brevity of people who have been intercepted before, which they had, because Russian maritime patrol crews treat NATO intercepts as a predictable feature of the Atlantic Circuit, as inevitable as the weather and roughly as threatening. The acknowledgement was correct, terse, and delivered in English with the specific accent of someone who has given this acknowledgement many times. The Tu-142 maintained its course and speed. The A-18F maintained its position. This is what a compliant intercept looks like when both crews are professionals doing their jobs in international airspace. And it is, despite everything else about the evening, genuinely how it is supposed to work. Now comes the intelligence accounting, which is where the evening becomes something more than a fuel state problem and a competent Russian approach profile. From 2:41 to 4:03, 1 hour and 22 minutes of continuous collection. The SLQ-32 suites across the carrier group had been building the most complete Berkut 95 radar characterization package the Atlantic Theater Collection Archive had received in current deployment. The Berkut 95 is not a new system. Its basic frequency profile is well documented, but operational emissions from a live mission platform in active search mode, collected at progressively closer range across a 200-mile approach, provide a dataset quality that no archived technical documentation can match. Specifically, the pulse repetition frequency variation, the Berkut. Try, used when transitioning from long-range search to medium-range mapping, a mode transition that occurred at 3:04 as the Tu-142 closed to within 150 miles, was subtly different from the documented library entry. Not dramatically different. Not a new capability. A firmware update. The kind of incremental adjustment that tells the intelligence cell something about the current state of Russian maritime patrol, avionics, maintenance, and upgrade cycles. The update was logged, characterized, and forwarded to the Theater J2 before the Tu-142 had completed its transit. The communications picture added dimension. The Tu-142 had been communicating with its base throughout the flight on encrypted high-frequency radio, standard for long-range maritime patrol, professionally executed. The encryption solid enough that content analysis was a task for the signal's intelligence processing chain, rather than the ship's own capability. But the transmission pattern, the timing, the frequency, the burst duration at each communication event, told a story about the flight's waypoint structure, the crew's reporting schedule, and the specific moments at which the mission commander had transmitted position reports. Two of these transmission events correlated precisely with the Tu-142 reaching specific ranges from the carrier, one at 200 miles, one at 100 miles. This was not noise. This was a standardized reporting protocol, which meant the ranges at which the crew was required to report home were known ranges with specific operational significance. That information went into the file, a file that grows with every circuit run, every transit, every transmission event logged by crews who believe they are the ones doing the observing. The Berkut 95's behavior during the photography pass, the specific time the radar spent in mapping mode versus search mode, the dwell time on each sector of the carrier group formation, gave the intelligence cell a detailed picture of what Russian maritime aviation was prioritizing in its collection against the Ford-class carrier. What they were looking at longest, what they photographed most carefully, which aspects of the carrier's configuration generated the most focused radar dwell. This is not a trivial data point. Understanding what an adversary's reconnaissance platform considers most important tells you something about what their targeting planners consider most important, which tells you something about where they expect their own systems to be most effective against your systems. The Tu-142 had spent 1 hour and 22 minutes conducting collection against the carrier group, and the carrier group had spent 1 hour and 22 minutes conducting collection against the Tu-142 conducting collection. The recursion is, in its way, the defining feature of Cold War-style maritime reconnaissance, updated for current hardware and current frequency libraries. The F/A-18F pilot shadowed the Tu-142 for 47 minutes, documenting the aircraft's external configuration, antenna placements, pod locations, visible modifications since the last photography package in the library. With the aircraft's own cameras, providing imagery that the intelligence cell would compare against the existing configuration file. There were 3 antenna modifications on the Tu-142's fuselage that did not match the previous configuration entry. 2 appeared to be updated versions of existing systems. 1 was not immediately identifiable against any current library entry and was flagged for specialist analysis. The pilot noted the unidentified antenna in his debrief with a specific description of its position, dimensions, and orientation. The debrief section covering this antenna took 6 minutes and generated a technical sketch that the intelligence officer photographed and transmitted to the Theater J-2 within an hour of the aircraft recovering aboard. The Tu-142 had taken photographs of the carrier. The carrier's intercepting pilot had taken photographs of the Tu-142. The photography exchange was, on balance, more useful to one side than the other, and the side that benefited more was the one that had been watching the Tu-142's approach, since it was 290 miles away at 2:41. The money picture for this operation requires context before the numbers make sense. A Tu-142 round trip from the Kola Peninsula to the Norwegian Sea. 12 hours, 4 Kuznetsov turboprops at cruise power, crew costs, AGI coordination overhead. Runs to approximately $180,000 to $240,000 in direct operational cost. It is a rational investment if the objective is strategic collection against a forward-deployed carrier group, which is what Russian maritime aviation has been doing for 68 years. This channel respects the strategic logic. USS Gerald R. Fords additional operational cost for the Tu-142 transit. Alert aircraft launch and tanker coordination at $95,000. SLQ-32 collection processing and intercepting pilot photography analysis at $160,000. Total, approximately $255,000. Intelligence value per the theater. J2 quarterly assessment. Burkett 95 firmware. Characterization. Updated transmission protocol analysis. Unidentified antenna documentation. And Burkett 95 collection priority mapping against Ford-class configuration. Assessed at approximately $3.4 million in equivalent collection cost. The Tu-142 spent 12 hours in the North Atlantic and left a detailed picture of its current configuration, reporting protocol and collection priorities. The carrier group spent 11 minutes in a documented gap and collected everything available to learn about the aircraft that transited it. The Tu-142 turned north at 0347 and climbed to its transit altitude for the return leg. The FA-18F shadowed it to the edge of the 100-mile perimeter, photographed the departure, and turned south toward the carrier. The pilot recovered aboard at 4:12 F4 in conditions. For 26-knot crosswind, 800-foot ceiling, 3-meter swells, that the landing signals officer described in his notes as acceptable within limits, and that the pilot would later describe to his roommate as an experience. He had been airborne for 1 hour and 3 minutes, had photographed an unidentified antenna, and had documented the Tu-142's departure heading and altitude for the intelligence cell's return routing reconstruction. He had consumed a significant amount of concentration and intended to address the food deficit immediately. Russian state media coverage appeared in an afternoon broadcast. A defense ministry spokesperson described a successful patrol demonstrating Russia's capability to monitor foreign military activity in adjacent waters, a routine exercise of lawful rights in international airspace. The footage showed a Tu-142 in flight, genuinely impressive from certain angles, particularly head-on where the 4 contra-rotating propellers produce a visual presence that does justice to the engineering. The broadcast noted that NATO aircraft had conducted an intercept, evidence of Western concern about Russian aviation capabilities. The broadcast did not mention the Berkut 95 firmware characterization. It did not mention the unidentified antenna, or that the carrier group had been tracking the Tu-142 since 290 miles at 0241, or that the AGI's 0241 course alteration would be noted in the post-exercise assessment as a collection coordination event worth understanding better. These were editorial decisions made professionally and without apparent discomfort. The tactical action officer filed his watch summary at 4:05, 45 minutes before his relief arrived at 4:47. The watch summary documented the Tu-142 contact, the CAP fuel state window, the alert aircraft launch, the intercept timeline, and the collection package summary. It ran to 6 pages in standard format, with a 2-page intelligence appendix that would be distributed above the tactical action officer's own clearance level, meaning he had written the summary of something he would not be permitted to read the full assessment of, which is a specific feature of intelligence work that naval officers accept as part of the architecture, and that does not prevent them from noting, privately, that it is a slightly odd way to run a filing system. He picked up what remained of his coffee. It had been cold for an hour and 40 minutes. He considered it. He put it down. There are limits, even on the mid-watch, and hour and 40-minute-old coffee at 4:05 on a November night in the Norwegian Sea is on the far side of those limits. He went to find something that could be described as food. The carrier's night baker had produced, for the overnight watch section, a tray of items that the galley board called cinnamon rolls, but which had, in the overnight resting process, achieved a density more consistent with structural components than pastry. He took one. He ate it standing at the serving window with the specific efficiency of someone who needs calories and has set aside aesthetic considerations for the duration. The Norwegian Sea outside the porthole was dark and cold and completely indifferent to the evening's events, as it had been before the Tu-142 appeared on scope, and as it would be when the next one came around on its circuit, and the next one would come. Because Russian maritime aviation has been flying this circuit for 68 years, and the operational calendar does not have a section for stopping. The threat library update that went out the next morning would be ready. The firmware characterization would be in the file. The unidentified antenna analysis would be completed by Thursday. Everything would be ready for the next time. The coffee would still be terrible. Some constants persist regardless of the operational picture. Bye for now.